What's going on, guys? XSR Detroit here with another video for you. Today I'm going to be talking about the Honda CRF300L's DIRT performance. Now, in a couple other videos I covered the street and highway performance, so if you're interested in that, I'll post a link up for those videos. Today we're just talking about all off-road. To give you guys some perspective, the Honda is the first dual sport I've ever owned. I've never really ridden in the dirt on a motorcycle before I got this bike, so we're not going to get into the deep specs of this bike. This is more of a review coming from somebody who's brand new to dual sport riding and new to these bikes in general, so we're not going to get too deep, but I just want to give you guys my experience after owning this bike for 9 months. One of the things that got me interested in the CRF300L was the engine itself. I wanted to start on like a beginner dual sport. I didn't want to start on like a 400 or 450. I figured a 300 would be a good spot as far as power delivery, and so far my experience with the CRF300L has been really good in that department. I haven't really seen the need to upgrade this bike as far as, you know, a performance ECU or exhaust or cams or anything like that. Like, it has enough power for me where I'm at with my riding skills right now and the kind of riding that I do. One thing I really like about this motorcycle is its first gear. It's really short and torquey, so it's very useful. There's been situations where I've gotten my rear wheel stuck in mud or stuck on an obstacle, and I've got that torque to put down to the ground, and it's really easy most of the time to just kind of crawl right out and keep moving. One of the criticisms I do have for this bike is the throttle feels kind of like a switch. Like, it's not a smooth, gradual twist and then you get power. And I noticed this recently. I was riding off-road, I was standing up in first gear, just moving slowly, and I went to basically turn the bike, and I knew, okay, I gotta give the bike throttle, but I realized, I'm like, oh yeah, there's that dead zone where I have to really kind of crank on the throttle and anticipate the power hitting the rear wheel. And I think the reason I haven't noticed this before is because my other bike, a Yamaha XSR900, has a throttle like that, where there's almost like a bit of a dead zone where you twist the throttle and not much is going on, and then the power kicks on. So I think subconsciously I've just known to avoid that, or I've been aware of how the throttle works on the CRF because it's very similar to my other bike. But I think for riders that are riding other kinds of motorcycles, it might be something you notice right away. Personally, it hasn't affected my dirt riding at all. I'm aware of it, but it's something I want to mention. I might put a different throttle tube on it to kind of smooth it out, or make some fine adjustments to my throttle cable itself and hopefully kind of take away that play. One thing I hadn't considered when I got into dual sport riding was how much I'd be working the clutch out on trails, and the CRF's clutch is very light, very easy to use, easy to find the contact point on it. At the end of the day, my hands don't feel fatigued from working it all day. That's one part I really like about technical riding on the trails, is you're constantly using clutch, throttle. It's just a lot of fun, and I do like that a lot. I have seen a lot of guys replace their clutch with the CBR300R clutch for a bit more snappy performance. So if you already have some dirt experience and you're looking for a little bit more, that might be the route you want to go down. Another positive about this bike is that the controls are easy to access and use. So if you have some motorcycle experience and you're learning dirt riding, it's going to feel really familiar. The clutch, the brakes, the throttle, everything, the shifter, everything feels really reminiscent of any other bike you would ride. So when you're riding out there, you have that familiarity. And if you're new to riding, these are going to be really friendly controls to learn as far as riding a motorcycle at all. This is my third review video on the Honda CRF300L, and I've mostly had good things to say about this bike, but we got to get into the worst part about this bike. I can't stand it on this bike anymore. It's the suspension, and particularly the rear suspension. It's just bad. Like, this bike will bottom out on you. I weigh 170 pounds, and I don't even beat on this bike that hard, and I have bottomed out this bike multiple times. And when you're riding, the rear suspension, I didn't notice it at first when I started riding because I was taking it really slow and kind of just feeling out, you know, what it's like to ride, you know, in the dirt, in the sand. And now that I'm getting a little faster and building these skills, the rear suspension, it's almost like a pogo stick. Like, it launches the bike from the rear. Like, it's really sketchy, and especially when I'm doing hill climbs, I can feel the suspension collapsing, and I can hear like my chain slapping around, and it's to the point where there's certain things I'm not even going to try until I swap that suspension out, because I don't really fully trust it to put that tire to the ground. It's just, it is bargain bin. It's the cheapest part of this bike. I understand the CRF is like a, you know, it's an affordable dual sport, but the suspension is garbage. And I've heard people say, like, it's a day one upgrade, you got to get rid of it. And I totally agree with them. I plan on swapping out my suspension with the K-Tech, and we'll kind of revisit it. I've heard it turns into a totally different bike. The front suspension, I haven't had as many issues with, but it's still bad. It's still just a single spring setup, so I am going to swap that out. But I will definitely say, if you're looking into buying this motorcycle, set aside like $1,000 for a suspension right off the bat, because that rear suspension feels a little dangerous to me. Now, providing you're not bottoming out your suspension, I actually think the amount of ride height with this bike is pretty good. There's a good amount of space between my belly pan and the ground, and I haven't really had to worry about getting caught up on things with it, which is really nice. I do recommend you get a belly pan for this bike, because it does bottom out a lot, and they're just good to have to protect your engine. The stock IRC tires are not the greatest, but I don't think they're as bad as everybody says. I will say, these tires are at their worst in the sand. So there's a couple sand tracks near my house, and typically what I do is I drop my tire pressure down to like 10 psi, and that did give me a noticeable increase in grip, but again, it was still pretty bad. When I'm riding in the sand on this bike with the stock tires, I always feel like I'm on the verge of losing control, which is not the most confidence-inspiring thing. So, but aside from that, dirt and mud, I haven't really had any issues. These tires haven't gotten in the way of me having a good time, so I understand that they're not good tires, but I don't think they're nearly as bad as people say, and most people are going to swap tires for their application anyway. Like, I live in Michigan, I need sand tires, so I'm going to buy sand tires, but if you live in some other place in the world, you're going to go with the tread that works for you. So I will say, of course you're going to end up replacing these tires, but I don't think they're as bad as everybody makes them out to be. One of the things people complain about the CRF300L is the weight, and it's a little over 300 pounds, and I get where they're coming from to an extent. I mean, it's a dual sport, not a dirt bike, so you've just got, more heavy stuff on the bike because it's a street bike too at the same time, and there have been instances where that weight has been like a pain in the ass. I'm 5'8", 170 pounds. Like, I'm not a gym rat, but I try to stay in shape. So there has been times where I put the bike into something where it's like, okay, I got to pull the bike out, and you're going to feel that weight for sure. I haven't had any issues picking up the bike, though, when I dumped it, which has been many times. So overall, it's fine, but for some people, the bike is going to feel a little heavy off-road. Weight aside, this bike is really easy to control on the trail. I never felt like I was out of control with it. It feels like nimble, and it's got a narrow profile. The most fun I have with this bike is when I'm on a trail and I'm just moving the handlebars underneath me when I'm standing, and the bike just feels like we're just one flowy unit, I guess. That's a weird way to describe anything. We'll get into this later in the video, but I will say I definitely recommend you get new handlebars for this bike. I switched to a CR high bend from Pro Taper, and it feels great having that control, especially when you're standing up. The taller bars are definitely a needed upgrade. One thing that didn't bother me when I first got the bike, but is starting to annoy me now, is the stock foot pegs. I mean, stock foot pegs generally are not that good, but there's been situations where my boot slipped off them where I thought that they shouldn't have, so I'm definitely going to be upgrading those over the winter. If you're looking to buy a Honda CRF300L and plan on doing most of your riding in the dirt, there's some upgrades that I think this bike needs right out of the box before you take it out to the trail. First thing I would upgrade is the suspension. If you can't do the full suspension, I would at least replace the rear shock, because that's most of the problem. But like I said earlier in the video, it's a pogo stick, and it honestly feels kind of dangerous at some times. From what I've read from other people swapping out their suspensions, they say it's a night and day difference, so I'm going to have to wait to spring to find out, but it's definitely something I wish I had already upgraded instead of buying other stuff for the bike. I should have just did the suspension first, and I definitely recommend you do the same. The next upgrade I would definitely recommend is a handlebar setup. I mentioned earlier that I went with a CR high bend from Pro Taper. I also got some Acerbis handguards to protect my levers and hands. It's just one of those things that I felt that I needed before I went off-road, because the stock bars are prone to bending, and I wanted a taller profile for the handlebars anyway, so you don't necessarily have to go with the high bend. I love it. There's a lot of different styles of handlebars, but I would definitely get a set of good thick bars that won't bend, and definitely get some handguards as well. If you're going to be taking this bike off-road, you're going to want a skid plate or a bash plate. I'm running the extended version from THEP. It's a thick plastic, and this thing has seriously taken a punch. Like, it is awesome, and it's probably saved me from a lot of headaches. You know, with the stock suspension, I deal with bottoming out. You know, you're going to get rocks flung at you, potentially from other riders, so you want to protect that engine, especially if you're taking it off-road. I put covers over my radiator and my rear master cylinder to add some protection to that. They look cool and they're practical. You know, you don't want to have a rock get launched at your radiator. My radiator cover is from THEP, which I got from Biker's Bits, which is a cheaper cover for sure, but it's been awesome for me. If you're looking for like a more high-end radiator cover, check out Flatlands. They have one with like a radiator brace. It's a really nice setup. I kind of wish I had gotten that, but I didn't know it existed, but it's something to look into. But definitely protect the radiator. This bike comes stock with a plastic cover that doesn't do anything, so I would definitely recommend you get something to cover up that radiator. My final upgrade I'd recommend is some breakaway mirrors. These have been great. I ride my bike to the trail, so it's nice having the mirrors when I need them, and then when I get there, I can just fold them down. And even if you leave them folded up and they hit a tree or something, they just knock loose and you tighten them back up again. They can take a punch. It's like a joint with two ram ball attachments. I think they're an inch. So even if you want to remove them completely, it's as simple as loosening them up and squeezing and they pop right off, which is definitely convenient. I bought the Honda CRF with the intention of getting into dual sporting. As somebody who's been riding on the street for 10 years, I wanted to see what the dirt side of things were like, and this bike has been awesome for that. It's not the fastest, the suspension is not good, the tires are whatever, but these are things that can be replaced and fixed. Most off-road guys, whether it's side-by-sides or dirt bikes, end up swapping out suspensions and tires anyway, so personally I don't think that's that big of a deal. But this bike never got in the way of me having a good time. The whole objective is to buy this bike, ride out, find a trail, hit the trail, and go home, and that's what this bike is great at. Like, I do have big plans for the future. I do want to take a trip on this bike. I do want to explore more with this bike, maybe do a motocross track, and just to see what it's capable of. And at this point in my riding experience, you know, putting 1,700 miles on this bike in 9 months and riding trails from a beginner to now, which I'm still a beginner, but I know more than I knew, but I never felt like this bike let me down, and I don't feel like I've really grown out of this bike yet. You know, I see people buying these bikes and selling them with 1,000 miles on it, and maybe they had more experience than I did, and maybe this wasn't the right bike for them, and that's completely fine. But I will say for myself, I don't have any intention of selling this bike anytime soon. I think I'm going to upgrade that suspension, get some fresh tires on it, and we're going to see how the performance is next spring. For now, you know, it's November, the bike's put away. I actually lost my license plate, so I can't even ride the bike anymore, so I got to order that up. But overall, I think the Honda CRF300L is a great bike if you're just starting out and you want to see what dirt riding is like. It is a little heavy, but that's okay. It doesn't bother me too much, you know, picking it up. You know, it's got some quirks that aren't great out of the box, but it's a budget bike. You know, if you want performance out of the box, you're probably going to have to go buy like a KTM or something. So I think for what it is, it's a fine bike. It's a good way to start out, and especially if you're into like brand new to motorcycles right now and you want a bike that you can ride on the street, like this is it, dude. This is a great little bike, especially if you just keep your expectations reasonable. I've just really enjoyed this bike, and it won't be leaving the garage anytime soon. That's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you for watching as always. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing and liking the video. If you have any questions, sound off in the comments section. And yeah, man, this bike has been a blast. I gotta say, honestly, I've had a ton of fun with it. I won't be upgrading anytime soon. We're gonna keep going with the CRF content, and I'm really excited to hit some new trails next year. But as always, ride fast, ride naked, wear your helmet, and I'll see you in the next one.